It's been a 3-year wait, but the Olympics are back, and the CBS Sports Podcast Network has you covered with everything happening in Paris. It's a new era for the U.S. women's national team, and Attacking Third will tackle all the women's soccer action. First Cut will keep close tabs on golf, while Beyond the Arc will follow the U.S. men's basketball team on a quest for another gold. And We Need to Talk Now will provide comprehensive coverage of women's athletes at the Olympic Games. Follow and listen to all CBS Sports podcasts for free on the Odyssey app and wherever you get your podcasts.
The Moth Podcast shares incredible true stories told live. And for our next episode, we're going for gold.
As I made my way around the track with my American teammates in a crowd of 100,000 people, as if they were the only ones in the stadium, I saw my parents.
3 stories all about the Olympics. This special episode's available right now. Subscribe to the Moth Podcast to make sure you hear it.
Hey, Sportly listeners, just a heads up. This episode addresses racial stereotypes and may include references to offensive language. So please take care while listening. It's February 4th, 2012. A sellout crowd of nearly 20,000 fans have assembled in Madison Square Garden to watch the New York Knicks take on the New Jersey Nets.
We are live at the world's most famous arena, and the New York Knicks are presented by Chase as they get set to take on their rival.
Less than 2 months into the season, the Knicks are in disarray. Nothing new for Knicks fans. They're 7 games under 500, and they've lost 11 of their last 13 games. Head coach Mike D'Antoni's job is on the line, and star players like Carmelo Anthony and Amari Stoudemire have been really struggling, and injuries have just ravaged the team. A little-known point guard named Jeremy Lin sits on the bench, unsure of his future in the NBA. Before today, Lin had only played in 38 games over 2 years, and since being signed, he's only clocked 55 minutes as a backup point guard. This game is potentially his last shot, literally. Before it began, his agent called to tell him that if he didn't play well, this could very well be his last game in the NBA, if he even gets the chance to play at all.
Jeremy Lin, and you're a pretty big ovation. We saw last night in Boston, Jeremy Lin was the first point guard off the bench, played in the first half. Tony Douglas sat.
With injuries to veterans Baron Davis and Mike Bibby, the Knicks are low on options for point guard. Lin first enters the game for rookie starter Iman Shumpert with a little over 3.5 minutes in the first quarter. This game would end up becoming a defining moment in Jeremy Lin's career.
Jeremy Lin drives and finishes. Nice play from Lin.
He takes control of the game. He's penetrating the lane, he's scoring at the rim, and he's dazzling the crowd with his passing.
Gets to the rim, puts it in, and a foul! Wow! Jeremy Lin does it again!
The game ends with Lin leading the team with a career-high 25 points, adding 7 assists and 5 rebounds. His efforts propel the Knicks to a much-needed 99-92 victory, marking a crucial win for the struggling team and giving the Garden faithful something to cheer about. This is just the beginning. Over the course of the next few weeks, Lin continues to dominate on the court, helping the Knicks rattle off 7 straight wins.
He wanted to take his man, come up on the other side of the rim.
Lin looking. Foul by...
His most notable performance takes place on February 10th, when Lin drops 38 points at the Garden on Kobe Bryant and the Los Angeles Lakers.
MVP chance.
The other factor in all of this, Mike, is that he's shooting over 58%. I mean, that's incredible, along with the fact that he's averaging over 25 points.
And he is so energized,
yes.
His teammates, Hubie.
Oh, it's great. It's been great for basketball in New York, no doubt about it. And it's been great for the fans.
It's such an amazing and improbable and, well, insane stretch of basketball. And fans absolutely eat it up. They're flooding to arenas to watch the Knicks' newest star. This is the height of Linsanity. And while injuries would eventually derail Jeremy Lin's time in New York, Linsanity remains an unforgettable and iconic period in both Knicks and NBA lore.
As the undrafted point guard from Harvard electrifies MSG once again. And the hero from Harvard is with Lisa.
As a Taiwanese American, Lin is a great source of pride for the AAPI community, which is largely underrepresented in sports and pop culture. But for Lin, becoming the face of Asian American athletes is a double-edged sword. There's the stress of living up to a certain image, the burden of carrying the torch for an entire community.
It's this constant, overwhelming sense of doubt from the outside that tempted me to even not believe in myself. That was one of the biggest obstacles that I had to overcome.
While many of us celebrate Linsanity, to Lin himself, it feels like yet another reminder that he's different. You see, for much of his life, he's struggled with being known as the Asian basketball player instead of just another hooper. With Linsanity comes this wave of commentary about his race that he's heard for years and will continue to face from here on out. It's all too familiar, and at times, it's exhausting. Sometimes the comments are blatantly racist, like when people tell him to go back to China, or mockingly tell him to open his eyes, or when they call him Yao Ming, the future Hall of Famer who's actually from China. He's reminded of stereotypes about Asian men being small, emasculated, and timid, all qualities that don't exactly make you a sports hero. Other times, the racial comments are not as overt. Newspapers paint him as a brainy Harvard kid who is composed and poised on the court, an archetype that limits perceptions of Lin's playing style, denying him the freedom and finesse he possesses. In February of 2012, during the height of Linsanity, ESPN publishes a headline about him that reads, quote, "chink in the armor," alongside a photo of Lin. ESPN would later apologize, saying they weren't aware that they'd used a slur.
And ESPN has now, they have fired an employee and suspended an anchor for using what they're calling offensive and inappropriate comment when covering Jeremy Lin.
It's a reminder of the pressure and racial undertones behind his stardom. Why can't this guy, born and raised in California, playing at the highest level of a quintessentially American sport, why can't he just be another great athlete? What does it mean to be an Asian American athlete in the world of American sports? Hey everybody, it's Kavitha Davidson, and welcome back to Sportly, a new podcast by Immigrantly Media. Each week, we cover pivotal stories that go beyond your typical stats and data. We're interested in the ways that sports have impacted our world beyond the numbers, the history, the iconic events, notable athletes, and lesser-known but still important moments on and off the field. And today, we're talking about some of the trailblazers for an underrepresented demographic in American sports, Asian Americans. Jeremy Lin is the first American-born NBA player of Taiwanese descent. But the story of Asian American athletes in pro sports goes back much further. In this episode, we'll go back in time and explore the lives of two of the earliest Asians in American pro sports, Walter Achiu and Art Matsu. Walter and Art's stories are full of both successes and otherness. Sometimes they are celebrated for their talents, and other times they're targeted for their differences. Given the issues we still have today regarding identity, representation, stereotypes, and opportunity, the question is, what did these issues look like for those early trailblazers who paved the way for Asians in American sports today? And was sports the ultimate avenue for these athletes to participate in American social life, Or did sports only further highlight their cultural differences? It's 1927, and 25-year-old football player Walter Achiu takes his very first step onto a professional football field, his cleats digging into the grass. Today, Walter is making NFL history. Now, the NFL is still in its early days. The league is in its 8th season with only 14 teams competing. One of those teams is the Dayton Triangles, who get their interesting name from their home field, Triangle Park in Dayton, Ohio. On their 22-man roster, Walter stands out. Born to a Hawaiian mother and Chinese father, Walter is the first player of Asian background to play in the NFL and in any professional American sports league overall. So how did he get here? Well, his story resembles those of many pro athletes. He excelled in sports from a very young age. Born and raised in Honolulu, Walter loved sports and was a phenomenal athlete in high school. When he eventually left Hawaii to attend school at the University of Dayton, he continued pursuing sports at the college level. Baseball, track, football, wrestling, you name it. Walter did it all. And he did it all in football, too. He was noted for his strong play as a halfback, but he was also a drop kicker, wingback, and end. Toward the end of his college career in 1925, he received an All-America honorable mention. And it's somewhere around this time that Walter gets his nickname. When asked how to pronounce his last name, which is notably non-European, but frankly not that hard to pronounce, Walter seems to take the question in stride. He says, "Sneeze and you'll get it." And that's how he comes to be known as Sneeze Achiu. By the time Walter joins the NFL just 2 years later, the league has already been weeding out their few black players. As someone who isn't white or black, Walter is allowed to play, but his identity can still be used against him. Racial segregation laws are still in full force in the American South.
Well, of course, being a Southerner, I'm not for it at all.
I see.
And I just don't know how it's going to turn out. I hope we don't have any trouble.
As the Dayton Triangles play across the nation, these laws threaten to prevent Walter from playing with his own team. The NFL has to list Walter's race as Hawaiian American Caucasian to bypass these laws. Even up north, Walter's race is contentious. When the Triangles head to a game in New York, they are billed as a, quote, team of immigrants. Clearly, to a lot of people, Walter's race is a pretty big deal. In 1928, it's Walter's second season with the Triangles when he's joined by another Asian player, 24-year-old Arthur Matsu, who was born to a Japanese father and Scottish mother. Born in Scotland, Art's journey to the NFL also starts in childhood. From an early age, he loved basketball, baseball, track, football, pole vaulting, and swimming. By the time he and his family moved to Ohio, he excels at almost every sport. He's so talented that renowned sports writer Paul Perman profiles him in a nationally syndicated article in 1917 when Art was only 13 years old. The headline on Perman's article reads, quote, "Jim and Howard, take off your hats to this Japanese boy. He's got you both beat." Jim and Howard referring to Jim Thorpe and Howard Berry, who were considered at the time to be perhaps the best all-around athletes in the world. After a standout high school career, Art is recruited by Princeton University and the College of William and Mary. He chooses William and Mary, the second oldest university in America, located in Williamsburg, Virginia. When Art starts school in the 1920s, the state of Virginia is still very much of the South, where racial segregation is the law of the land. He's the very first student of Asian descent in the school's then 230-year history. And while his race doesn't keep him from attending the college, it still could make life on campus difficult for the 19-year-old athlete. In 1923, during Art's freshman year, a chapter of the Anglo-Saxon clubs is founded on campus. It's an organization that denounces non-European immigration and advocates for white supremacy, with the goal of making America, quote, 100% white. A year later, Virginia passes the Racial Integrity Act, which bans interracial marriage. The state now divides its residents into two stark racial categories. You're either white or you aren't. The law defines white as, quote, the person who has no trace whatsoever of any blood other than Caucasian. These weren't sentiments that existed outside campus gates. An editorial in the William and Mary student newspaper openly supports this legislation. Under this law, his parents' marriage would have been illegal. And since he was the only Asian American student at the college, it barred him from dating or marrying any of his classmates. In spite of the segregationist tenor on campus, Art excels throughout his years in college. Student newspapers rave about him as a triple threat quarterback. He's a sharp thrower who's quick on his feet with a strong punting leg to boot. His teammates eventually select him as team captain, which makes him the first Asian American captain of a college football team. With time, Art rises to national prominence for his skills on the football field. Like in November of 1925, when William and Mary plays Harvard. After the game, the New York Times publishes a headline that reads in part, Harvard wins 14-7, W&M surprises, Matsu amazes crowd. The article praises Art's performance, quote, besides punting in fine fashion and making some steady advances when he carried the ball, the tall and thin player saved his team many times when he called the plays so that the Crimson defense was baffled. Aside from his athletic career, Art also excels in academics and is quite active in social activities on campus. He joins William and Mary's Secret Seven Society, 2 honors fraternities, and he's the president of the varsity club. He's popular, well-liked, and funny. During his senior year, he puts on a farcical ballet show alongside his teammate, a white guy named Meb Davis. One of the most memorable moments from the show comes when Art, in white stockings and a fluffy ballet skirt, takes off from a springboard in the wings and goes flying into the arms of his teammate, who then carries him off stage. By the end of that year, Art is voted the student who has done the most for the college. The student newspaper describes him as, quote, the greatest quarterback that ever represented William and Mary, and one of the best who ever played in the state. Now, this is the same paper that openly supported Virginia's racial integrity laws. So, does that mean Art is a star, regardless of race, or is he always kind of an outsider because of it? This is the shaky territory that Art finds himself in again and again. You know, in doing research for this episode, there's strikingly little about direct racism Art might have faced on campus. Local news articles probably wouldn't have documented that, and clearly his own campus newspaper wouldn't have either. But I can't help but wonder how Art himself felt. Did he feel threatened, or did his place on the football team provide him some cover of safety? I mean, clearly there's a tension between the college and the state of Virginia upholding segregation, all while he's celebrated for his football accomplishments. It's tricky because, on the one hand, during this time, most of the prejudiced language and laws and white supremacist ideology was directed at Black people, not Asians. Art was half Japanese, and scholars now look back at Art's story and believe that, for the most part, white students saw Art as a safe person of color. It's the whole model minority thing, right? This problematic belief that Asians in particular are the best and most successful of non-white people. As an Asian American, I'm a daughter of Indian immigrants. I went to a math and science high school. I've dealt with this notion my whole life. If you have to be immigrants, we're the good ones. It might seem like Asian Americans benefit from that perception, from so-called positive stereotypes that we are hard workers who do well in school and thus in society. But what that does is it creates and fuels notions of a racial hierarchy. What that doesn't do is stop white supremacy. So, in some people's minds, sure, Art is Asian, so he might be an outsider, but he's smart enough, strong enough, and funny enough to make up for it. On the other hand, of course, Art's race was still a target. As we said before, the Racial Integrity Act threatened both his parents' marriage and his own potential relationships. And while sports writers certainly celebrated his talents, they also identified him with slurs that were often used to refer to Japanese people. And articles would say things like, quote, "Unlike many of his race, Matsu is tall and thin." So stereotypes about race and body type are nothing new. This brings us back to 1928. After graduating from the College of William and Mary, Art joins the Dayton Triangles. And guess what? He's the quarterback for the Triangles, making him the first Asian American quarterback to play professional football. That season, he and Walter Achiu share the same uniform, both playing for the Triangles. It's frankly not a great season on the field. The team goes winless, and both Walter and Art leave the Triangles after that year. And man, I wish we had some record of what their interactions might have looked like, if they spoke much or at all. Did they talk to each other about their experiences as the only Asians on the team? Did they support each other in moments of racial tension? Did their different backgrounds, Japanese versus Chinese, mean they had less in common than we might think? Were they even friends? Did they joke and laugh and share memories of this sport they both loved? Sadly, we can only ask these questions. After leaving the Triangles, Art Matsu and Walter Achiu go their separate ways. Walter takes up a career as a professional wrestler. In the 1950s, he wrestles 2 matches a night, 6 nights a week.
Sneeze is not. Walter Achiu. Good advice, yeah. What is known as eye gouging.
The discrimination from his football years follows him well into the next few decades, as his wife Susan would later tell the Washington Post in 1992. Susan, who was white, recalled a night when the couple was dining at a restaurant in El Paso, Texas. Someone walked right up to her and asked, "Couldn't you find a white man?" This is 1992. And you can imagine how long this couple and Walter had been dealing with this. Despite being the first Asian American to play in pro sports, we don't know nearly as much about Walter as we'd like. But at the very least, in 1974, the University of Dayton inducts Walter into their Athletic Hall of Fame, publicly recognizing his legacy as a talented athlete and trailblazer for Asian Americans in sports. As for Art Matsu, he transitions his football career into coaching. After a stint working with high school football, he starts working as an assistant coach at Rutgers University in 1931, a career that would last nearly 20 years. Meanwhile, the College of William and Mary still commemorates Art as their first, quote, true gridiron hero. In 1969, Art's alma mater inducts him into their Athletics Hall of Fame. And in 2022, the college renames the archway that leads to their football stadium the Art A. Matsu Arcade.
Many of you know now Arthur Matsu's name. In April, William & Mary named the Zabel Stadium Arcade in his honor.
And even the state of Virginia honors Art, naming a highway after him with a historical marker as part of a wider project that honors Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. The stories of Walter Achiu and Art Matsu are important to keep in mind as we fast forward to today. Since Walter and Art, we've seen many more firsts for Asian American athletes, but it's certainly been a push and pull. And the hope is that we get to a point where we stop being firsts. In recent years, some things have changed for the better. For one, many colleges and universities are far more diverse than they used to be. It's certainly not perfect, but at the very least, white supremacist student organizations are unconstitutional, at least for now. And Walter and Art have paved the way for Asian Americans in sports at the collegiate and professional level. But Asian American athletes today still tell stories of prejudice. Former NFL player Eugene Chung, who was the first Korean American to be drafted in the first round of the NFL draft and played in the 1990s, has recently exposed the racism that he's faced over the years. There were coaches discouraging him from D1 football on the basis of Chung being, quote, Oriental. And even after a successful NFL career, Chung was told that he was not the right minority when interviewing for coaching positions.
I was really kind of confused. You're not the minority that that they're looking for, or along those lines. And I was really confused about that, and taken aback and emotionally prepared. Like, well, what do you mean by that?
There's Olympic snowboarder Chloe Kim, who is a sensation in her own right, but has received hundreds of hateful comments about her race on social media since she was 13.
I was young, and people would say the meanest things to me. It's really hard to be happy when someone's saying such cruel things, but when you learn to love yourself, I think it's a lot easier to take it, because at the end of the day, you know you better than anyone else.
What's important is that athletes have been using their platforms and feel empowered to talk about their experiences and encourage change, especially after COVID sparked a rise in anti-AAPI sentiment and violence. How do we push back against this? Is there a way to overcome this feeling of being kind of accepted, but also kind of an outsider?
You need to leave.
Oh, you do not talk to us just like that.
Which one?
You need to leave.
Asian piece of
Oh my God.
Pandemic-fueled racism is, in part, what encouraged Jeremy Lin to speak up about his prior experiences and to get candid about Lin's sanity.
The hate-fueled attacks on Asian Americans are disturbing, but why are we surprised? For many of us as Asian Americans in this country, we know what it feels like to be told we don't belong, that we're perpetually foreigners. And even though others try to minimize us to one entity, we represent so many different cultures, so many different backgrounds, so many different stories.
But in the end, the legacy of Jeremy Lin and those who came before him lives on.
I want the next generation to grow up, to not be ashamed of being Asian, to be proud of your culture, your upbringing, your parents, your appearance, your talents, your personality. I want them to be proud to be themselves and to have an equal and a fair chance to be their fullest self, to not have to deal with everything that the previous generations had to deal with.
He ended up playing 9 seasons in the NBA, and in 2019, he won a championship with the Toronto Raptors.
The Raptors, the 2019 NBA champs.
Thanks so much for listening to Sportly. Sportly is an Immigrantly media production. This episode was produced by Sadia Khan and Shay Yu, written by Michaela Strother, Emmanuel Monahan, and me, Kavitha Davidson. Our sound designer and editor is Lena Chang. Our theme music was created by Simon Hutchinson. Other music by Epidemic Sound. Tune back in next week and every week for more Sportly. And if you have thoughts or suggestions for a topic you'd like me to cover, I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to email me at kavitha@immigrantlypod.com. And if typing a long email just isn't your thing, record and attach a voice memo to your email. And who knows, I might read it or play it in one of the upcoming episodes. See you next week.